there's no rule saying that you have to take a gap year. Although I would say that most of the time when I talk to someone who's trying to apply at the end of their junior year, most of the time they are not ready. I think it's pretty rare for me to meet somebody at that point who really has everything that they need and everything ready to go, and where it's at a competitive level that they're actually going to stand out and really be putting their best foot forward at that given time. So, no, you don't have to take a gap year, even if you count your senior year as your gap year. Like, you don't have to take a gap year beyond that. You could apply at the end of your junior year, but I just don't think most people are really ready. So, in a sense, I think the gap year has almost become a pretty standard part of the process. I think the average applicant age continues to go up every single year, probably around like 24 years old, 25 years old, something like that is what I would guess now. So, no, you don't have to take it, but I would say it's usually encouraged.
I started teaching test prep 25 years ago, and I helped my first student apply to medical school 20 years ago. Back then, you could get into med school even with sizable holes in your application. So you could have paltry clinical experience and still get in if your grades and MCAT were good enough. And since then, a couple things have happened. First, the MCAT added whole new requirements around people skills, psychology, that kind of stuff, biochemistry. So several more courses were added to the pre-med roster. The second is the acceptance rate hasn't moved, but pre-meds have become more and more competitive over the years. I think I want to call this the Tiger Woods effect, this idea of like parents identifying bright and early. I'm going to make sure that they are ready for med school right away. So the applicant pool as a whole has gotten more competitive. And because of that, it just means to be a competitive candidate, you cannot have many or really any true holes in your application, which the only solution to that generally is time. It takes time to raise your GPA. It takes time to build your clinical hours and your extracurricular accomplishments. It takes time to get good grades and have enough time for the MCAT. So a gap year is not necessary if you're one of those kids that has known you want to be a doctor since high school. You took all AP classes in high school. You entered with a load of credits. You're in college. You have been on the right path from day one with few hiccups. Those kids still get into med school straight away. Everybody else needs at least one gap year, possibly two.
Honestly, I think one of the biggest ones is that they need more time to take the coursework in preparation for the MCAT or just have more time to prepare for the MCAT itself because they either took it already and didn't do very well, or they've been putting off taking it, maybe perhaps wisely because it's been scary to them and they haven't felt fully prepared enough. And so I think definitely giving yourself more time to go into that M cave and exclusively focus on the test is definitely a common one. Sometimes people are just incredibly burnt out. Like it's like they're trying to do everything all at once. I'm trying to wrap up school. I'm trying to add all these new experiences while studying for the MCAT, while trying to work on the application. And they realize, okay, if I just can get through college graduation and just put that part of my life behind me, then maybe I can focus, you know, the year moving forward on just getting my application fully ready. And so sometimes I think they feel like they're trying to do too many things at once, and that's causing them to have to accelerate their work on the application and feel like it's rushed or they're doing it in a half measured way. And usually it's always pretty good reasons why they're doing it. It's pretty rare that I have to sit there and talk someone out of taking a gap year. It's usually the other way around where I'm trying to talk them into doing it because for some reason they feel hesitant to do it. So those are some reasons, and generally they're all good reasons. Even if it's just like, hey, I want some time off before med school. That's a good reason, you know.
I think most pre-meds don't choose to take a gap year. I think they take a gap year because they have to. And that's a missed opportunity. You're going to be on track for the rest of your life. Once you start med school, it's 4 years of med school, it's 4 years of residency, it's a fellowship, it's you're starting your career. It's really hard to take time to do anything personal that you want to do. So I would suggest the main reason they don't choose it is a lack of imagination. They can't think of what they would do with the time. So then they assume there's nothing good that they should be doing with that time. So they just default into, well, I'll pedal to the metal and hope I can get all these requirements in without really thinking about what they want their life to look like.
I think generally we at Passport have a bit of a gap year mantra, which is do one thing to build on a strength of yours, do one thing to correct a weakness of yours, and do one thing that's just for your own enjoyment and edification as a person. So, one memorable one that Rob and I have talked about and that we wrote about in an article was a kid did some research for NASA, which was not only just a cool thing to do, but also really helped to rectify his weakness, which was that he didn't have very much research. He also uh, continued to build on the nonprofit work that he had already been doing and expanded its reach and created more events that targeted more populations. And so that was building on a strength. And then I'm not sure whether he got like his pilot's license or he did some private plane type of thing, but he flew all the way to the tip of Argentina and then all the way back to the States as his fun thing to do. So that's speaking in pretty ideal terms. Like that's a pretty all-star gap year. But I think if you just think about that as the whole idea of correcting a weakness, building on a strength, and doing something fun for yourself, you can make that look a whole bunch of different ways that aren't, you know, flying to the tip of Argentina necessarily. But that's what I would say is a productive way of approaching it.
That student flew to the tip of Argentina and biked back to the United States.
Oh, okay. I forgot a detail of it. Yeah, it's even better than I thought.
It's
Right.
even better. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, they say that if you're going to be a writer, you better live an interesting life to have something to say. And so it's not about being an interesting pre-med. It's much more about being a committed pre-med. So what should you do with your gap year? Well, continue the commitments to the things that matter most to you. Let's assume that every 3 months you're going to touch base with medical schools to tell them the extraordinary things that you've been up to. So it's not like you're suddenly shifting every 3 months or that you have to be particularly standout. But if you have committed yourself to a particular community that you want to serve, then they would expect you to continue that during your gap year, or continue a similar activity because this matters to you. And if it matters to you, then you would choose to do it whether or not med school's on the line. So that's the first way to think about that is keep showing that commitment to the stuff that matters to you. Fixing a weakness depends on what the weakness is. A lot of times people don't know if something that they have is truly a weakness or just a slight deficiency. I generally think it only makes sense to get a master's degree or a special master's if your GPA is low or if you don't have the prerequisite coursework. A lot of people think of a master's degree as like a default. Well, I don't know what else to do, so I'm just going to go pay a lot of money to get a master's I'll never use. It's like, well, what are you doing? I just think what counts depends on you, your strengths, and your personal development. And give it some thought because that can be really rewarding when you do.
No, that's definitely not a red flag. I think generally most schools appreciate people that have had to work normal jobs, if you want to call it that, where maybe they need to do it to support themselves. Maybe they need to do it to start, paying off loans that may only get larger and accrue more. If you work at a pizza place or you're a barista or you're a hostess or whatever it is, those jobs are usually actually kind of cool to write about sometimes if they're like interesting enough. But they're also just I think they're green flags in a lot of ways where it's like, okay, this person's probably going to have a degree of humility and customer service and down to earthness and all these things that sometimes people can lack when they're applying. So I would say, though, if it's the only thing that you have to show for yourself for that time off, that's going to be a little limiting. It might be understandable if the circumstances are really forcing you to like work it full time or something. But I would try to balance it with other application builders as well, but it's certainly not a red flag.
I would call it a little bit of a missed opportunity. I think in an ideal world, you'd get paid for something that meaningfully advances your application. And real world experience, especially if it shows that you're not spoiled or not that privileged, great, awesome. But you can do that while also working at a medical office sometimes or as a phlebotomist, say. So there's ways of getting paid to do medical work that will also advance your application, probably a little more than just your average restaurant job.
In my opinion, too many gap years would just be something where you would start to have important things expiring. Like if your coursework's expiring or your MCAT's expiring or something like that, that's probably a sign that you're dragging your feet a little bit and that you need to get the application going. But that's pretty rare because as long as you've been staying busy and productive, and as long as you have a convincing answer as to why you've taken the time, then medical schools aren't going to really care when you acquired these things that you need. They're only going to care that you acquired them at some point. Now, it might come up in their minds or during an interview what was with this kind of slower or more unconventional timeline. But I don't know. Two to me, like two is fine. Whether you count senior year or not, I still think two is fine. Even if you graduated and then like 2 more years to apply, I think that's fine. I personally don't feel like you should be in a big hurry. And a lot of times, if you take your time, you're going to be more competitive. You're going to have more to talk about. And you're probably going to have a lot more perspective and wisdom as a person, too. There's probably such a thing as too many, but it's pretty rare to encounter that.
If you go on a med school's website or the MSAR, there will be a date, oldest MCAT accepted, and then there'll also be generally a date about how long they'll accept your prereqs for. So it's somewhere between 2 and 5 years for the MCAT, and it's somewhere around the 3 year mark where they start to wish that the prereqs were more current. Meaning, if you're out of school for more than for 3 years or more, med schools start to wonder whether it's going to be hard for you to get back into the classroom. Now, if all you've ever earned in your life is straight A's and a great MCAT score, that'll be less of a concern than if you're a more like normal stats kind of candidate. But generally speaking, 3 gap years starts to become problematic for that reason. You might have to retake the MCAT. You might have to get back in the classroom to get your academic chops current.
I would say not thinking about it until it's too late or until you're already in it. Because I think what happens is just the process of applying is so time consuming and energy consuming that people sometimes finish and then they're like, oh wait, I didn't really think about like what it would actually be like once I was done applying. Now I'm just sitting here, I'm idle. Plus, it's in the middle of interview waiting game season, so I'm stressed, and now I got really nothing to show for myself. And you don't really want to be planning it when you're in the midst of doing all of your busiest things. So I would really think about it in advance if you can. Really think, can I get some things lined up for the late summer and the early fall once the secondaries are done? And can I start thinking about that maybe actually even as early as like February, March before the application season really gets underway in May and everything? So I would say try to think about it in a long term planning way. I think waiting until it's too late and then realizing you don't have much to show for yourself is probably the biggest mistake.
I would split this into two varieties of mistakes. The first is what Ryan was just talking about. If you're applying to MD schools, there's the overall acceptance rate's 41%. That means 59% aren't getting in. And when you apply again, the central question of your application shifts from, are you a good contribution to our school, to what have you done since applying? And so if you haven't thought that through for your gap year, then what you've done since applying is sort of more of the same, which is exactly the thing that didn't get you in last time. So it's unlikely to work this time. That's the first type of mistake. And that's from not planning out the gap year and not thinking through, not wanting to consider that it's going to take you more than one application cycle. That's something else I see, like, oh, I'm just shooting for plan A right now, I'm not worried about plan B. It's like, no, you need to like have an honest conversation about what you're going to do if you don't get in, and it can't just be hope and pray that you do. So that's mistake type number one. Mistake type number two would be not acknowledging that you need to take a gap year until it's too late. So this is a form of trying to juggle too much schoolwork and extracurriculars and say MCAT prep, and then getting a bad score on the MCAT. Unlike the SAT and ACT, which you can effectively hide from college admissions offices, you cannot hide a bad MCAT score. They will see every time you've taken the exam. Now, it's okay to take it twice and to improve. That's normal even, but you don't want to just go in and get a bad score because of a poor preparation and poor planning. Similarly, you don't want to launch an application to 25 med schools that you never complete. That looks bad. That happens quite a lot. People will submit the primary and then get overwhelmed by secondaries and drop out of the application process, which effectively still sort of counts as applying once to medical school and not getting in. It doesn't put a permanent stain on your application, but it's still not a good idea. It's not a good idea because it's dispiriting to do that. It's not a good idea because it's costly, and it's not a good idea because, again, you further have to explain to medical schools that, hey, this was just a lack of planning in this one area. It's not indicative of my inability to plan for the rest of my life. So that's the second flavor of mistake. Usually it goes like this. If you're trying to take the MCAT and apply without a gap year, then you're going to take the MCAT while you're also balancing schoolwork, which is tricky and can generally only be done well by top flight applicants, people who are great at standardized tests, who have don't break a sweat in their pre-med classes. If that's you, great, you can probably make that work. If that's not you, which is most of us, then probably the gap year is the better plan. So the gap year allows you to take a whole summer to not take classes and just focus on the MCAT, which is much better way to do it. You need about 300 hours dedicated time to studying for the MCAT. That's generally best done over a 3-month period, over a summer break, taking at the end of it and taking it before it is application year. So that's one thought. The second is, if you're not taking a gap year, it is likely that you're still taking MCAT prerequisites while you're studying for the MCAT. And so the MCAT is a scaled exam, which means you're competing with other people taking it on the day that you take it for the top scores, which means if they've taken their prerequisites before studying for the MCAT and have had a better preparation process, they're likely to outscore you, which it's like running a race with just a little bit of a handicap, with a little bit of something that's holding you back from everybody else. So if you're strong enough as a runner, then yeah, you can do that. But if you're not, then it's unlikely to end well. And then the third thing is, if you are taking it without taking a gap year, taking the MCAT, it's unlikely that you have a backup plan for when to retake your MCAT. And the backup plan can be 2 weeks later in case you get sick on the day of. And the backup plan can be you get your score back. It's not as nice as you would have hoped. And you have to get back in the saddle and retake it. From the day you get that score, it needs to be another 2 months as the backup plan. So a typical ideal MCAT study plan is take it at the end of summer. You get your score back in fall. You have until January to get yourself back into the study habits and meaningfully improve that score. You can't do that if that's your application year. So that's how it impacts MCAT. How it impacts applying to medical school is this. You should not apply later than June of the application year. So application opens in May. The vast majority of students submit the end of May/early June. By the end of June, if you cannot submit your application, then I recommend you wait until next cycle. Just the application percentages go down with each passing week in the month of June, to the point where once you get to July, August, your chances of getting in are about half what they would have been in June. That's stretching it a little bit. There's some causation correlation problems there, but basically apply early or else. So that means you got to start writing your essays in the spring or earlier. If you've got a pre-med application committee, sometimes you have to submit them by November, believe it or not, which means you need to have your experiences that you're going to write about complete by middle of your junior year. Because by May of your junior year, you need to submit the application. So that's a tough ask for a lot of pre-meds. A lot of times they might have just been starting some meaningful experiences that they're going to want to write about in their application, but they haven't done so by the timing that's required to get in and submit early. So the difference there is applying with a more complete version of your application versus an incomplete version of your application. If it's incomplete and you're a rock star candidate, straight A's, awesome, MCAT, excellent extracurriculars, you can still make it work. But that's not most of us. So that's the difference between waiting a year in terms of how you can reflect on the experiences that you've had in your essays.
I would tell them all the stories in my 13 years of doing this and all the people that I've talked to who regret rushing the process and end up being in a position of being a reapplicant because they felt like they had to rush the process, do everything all at once, not fall behind, not deal with the shame or embarrassment that they're feeling surrounding a gap year. Very rarely will someone tell me that they've regretted taking a gap year and that they've regretted waiting. Usually it's the other way around, where I talk with people and they're like, oh, yeah, in retrospect, I don't know what I was thinking trying to rush it and apply when I did. Looking back, Very unlikely that you were going to regret the gap year, but it's very likely that if you don't take one, you will potentially regret it. A lot of people do this, and that's okay. That's for the best in most cases. And it's not going to put you at a disadvantage. It's not going to be some stigma attached to you or anything. If anything, it's just going to make you stronger. The gap year is your friend.
There's no shortage of teenagers in America wanting to become doctors. The question is not, do you want to be a doctor? The question is, what do you bring to the field? And if you don't have a good answer to that question, a gap year is a wonderful time to build on it, to build an interesting experience that's going to influence the career that you're seeking and the kind of doctor you become. So that's the way to think about it, is it's not just about fulfilling the pre-med checklist and being enough to get in. It's about accelerating through the process, about developing a talent or skill or experience that you will then bring to your medical school class and your future patients.